8 o'clock on Tuesday, January 16th, 2018, 8 o'clock a.m. Pacific time. This is the beginning of the barn raising session. Set alarm every Tuesday for 7:59 a.m.
Lydia's alarm set for every Tuesday at 7:59 a.m.
Hey, Glenn.
Hello, hello. Yeah, I'm trying a little new thing here. Just to hold this microphone on my head. So
Sound is coming through quite nicely, so thanks for making that adjustment.
yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
that's great. Are we the first ones here on the scene?
Yes, we are. I was just chatting with Tammy, so I know she's on the way. And Doug also confirmed, so I think he's also on the way.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's been a lot of engagement in the last few days.
Even just in the last 12, 15 hours.
Yeah. Amazing.
Hey, so Glenn, I'm going to give you a link in the chat. This is an experiment. I'd like to see whether or not you think it's useful.
Mm-hmm. What should I do with it?
Sorry, that's the wrong link. Sorry, let me change that. Let me go to.
Hello, Doug.
Hey, Doug.
Hello.
Hey.
So I'm giving you a link as an experiment. Okay, it's that workflowy link in the chat.
Okay. Should I just click on it or?
If you like, it's basically a way for us to take shared notes where we don't always have to type at the end. We can actually insert anywhere we want. And it's also an outliner, so it might give us an ability to organize ideas. So it's an experiment.
Okay. So
we may never use it again, but it's an experiment.
What exactly were you thinking that we take notes during the conversation and write it in?
Some of us do take notes. You know, I know Doug at times has been taking copious notes. I at times take copious notes. Sometimes Tammy does. There she is. So this is a way for us to take notes where you don't always have to type at the end. You can actually type somewhere in the middle, and you can edit as you go. You know, so this is an experiment to see. Hey, Tammy, good morning.
Well,
good morning, Tammy.
I like that it's a shared resource in real time, so everybody gets to see an aggregative thing.
Yeah,
I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, everybody synchronizes, but it takes maybe 3 to 5 seconds for it to synchronize any given thing. So get people a little bit too impatient. Mr. Peacock, are you still in Latvia? Uh-oh, you look frozen.
I am still in Latvia, yes.
Hey, Gavin, is there some way you can actually improve your microphone sensitivity? It's very soft right now.
Okay, bear with me 1 second.
Oh, that was much better.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Now we can see you, Gavin.
And hear you.
Is that?
Well, the volume is okay, but you occasionally are dropping out. So I suspect that the network speed is not great.
Yeah. Good to see everybody. Hello.
Yeah. Boy. Hey. Welcome. Doug,
Yes.
got a lot of activity and follow-up on yesterday's session, huh?
Yeah, I guess it it resonated for some folks.
Well, clearly I missed you guys. I had sent a message to Tammy about why I missed, but just for the record, is having to do with a friend of mine needing some attention. So I otherwise would have very much enjoyed being with you. But as it was, I got to react somewhat in non-real time, asynchronously, and I know I'm not getting as much out of it as I could have if I had been there. But it was still a fun exchange. Actually, it's still going on, I believe.
It is. Well, your visage was on the screen and omnipresent throughout. So, albeit asynchronous, your energy contributed and was part of the field. It's sort of like having this presence looking out over what's going on. So you were there metaphorically.
Well, responding so much to some of that activity, I haven't even finished reviewing that whole session on Sunday yet, which of course is another very long one.
Well, playing it back at double speed helps.
You don't get the full emotional impact at 2x, do you? Right?
No, but at least you get to sort of get it all in the door before the next onslaught hits you.
Now we got 4 onslaughts every week.
Man, the waves are picking up in frequency and amplitude. They're it's pretty juicy stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so in respect for those of you guys that are here right on time, it's 8:07 already, and I again confess. Is that Gavin? Yeah, Gavin's rejoined. So I again have to confess, and maybe this is going to work at cross purposes, but I also again today came with some notes. But again, those notes are just ideas that don't have to guide, but they're when I think there might be an opportune moment to inject something, I'll use those notes. So,
I would encourage you to just download, because incidentally, there is a pattern of you sharing that you're carrying a load, and inevitably you subordinate you in the flow, and we never get to it. And so I'd love to sort of make explicit and give you license to cough up, because I don't know about anybody else, but okay, I'm ready. I'd like to hear it. I didn't hesitate to say, here's the CMM, frame as far as Fabian and I have gotten top level, and here's the link, and so everybody can or can't at their will. But I'd love to, get your whole list off your plate and be the beneficiary of that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And let me again caution that if I were to do that, it would turn more into a monologue / lecture. And I don't think that's very, I guess, collaborative. So I just want to do it in a way where people can react, appropriately. And I'll feed things in there so long as people look like they're absorbing. But if they're not, and there's something that takes us down a small little tributary somewhere, I'm completely okay with that. And so I appreciate the sentiment, Doug. But again, I think is the spirit of this group. I don't want to monopolize it, and I don't want to take it over in any way. But I appreciate that. Okay. Hey, any other opening statements for others as we arrive here?
Morning, everyone.
Hey, Tammy.
I would also encourage you, Sam, to just jump in. I feel like sometimes you hold back or you give prefaces. Just go for it.
Okay. Glenn?
Yeah.
Any opening statement?
No, nothing special. I really just followed a little bit of the activity since Sunday, and really feels a lot of energy, and I'm pretty good. Yeah, I also think, yeah, just jump into it and share what you want, and we'll just take it from there. And I'm also eating a little bit, so I'll just, yeah, listen in at the beginning.
Okay. So one framing perspective from me, and then we'll see whether I can jump into my notes. And that is, I'm recently aware of the Saratha Rama's group, the Growing System Success group. And without knowing too much about it, I think I mean, obviously she's seen a lot of overlap with GCC, but I think the fundamental questions that she's asking seem to be somewhat overlapping and addressing a similar direction as the fundamental questions that I've put forth in what I'm calling collaborology. So I'm really looking forward to that set of conversations because, I think I want to get away from this use of names and use of terms to separate us, and if we come at it from a GCC standpoint and I come at something else with a collaborology standpoint and there's something else coming at it from a enlivening edge standpoint and something else coming at it with a growing system success standpoint and etc., then not to mention the metacognition engine. I think if we understand how they're addressing similar needs, there's a less of a separation that happens when we forget the words and we really sense into what it is we're all trying to understand and know and learn. So that's something that I've really recently been trying to adjust, is to use fewer names and just get after some of the more fundamental questions. So one question I would lead with is, and I think this is going back to the metaphor of this particular event as a barn raising. If we're thinking about barns, what would we consider the foundation? If we're actually going to put together a barn here in cyber, the 8th continent, if you want to use that metaphor, and we just landed, there's Plymouth Rock over there, and, we're just a band of little stragglers that barely survived getting onto the 8th continent. What foundation would we put together if we wanted to build some shelter for ourselves? And I'll use that as a starting question if you'd like to take a shot at that. I have others, but that's one.
Mutual respect, curiosity, a connection to the greater challenges that we're facing, and ways to be able to be agile in that space.
I love it. Thank you, Tammy. By the way, as Tammy was speaking, I was taking notes in the notes section of workflowing. And I clearly misspelled something, so it's an opportunity for somebody to experiment with editing in that space.
I would just say being, attention, presence. I feel that's the foundation, but it's, as you said about different words. I felt what Tammy said was much in the same direction, but it's sort of the being together and how that works, or you could also say how we do us, sort of in real time. That's the first thought that comes to me about what the foundation is.
Dr. Breitbart?
For me, it being rooted in through a human experiential lens. That everything to be built on top of it is framed through a human experiential lens. So I guess calculating backwards in terms of informing the foundation, that it's that sort of values principle thing in how we as human beings, what our agreement is in how we want to relate to each other.
Let me add a question that's actually been, sort of present in my mind as we go through these. That is, who is we? And some of you may know that. I don't yet know that. So let me add that particular question, which is, are we the ones who arrive in this particular set of Zoom sessions? Are we the ones on Facebook interacting on these threads? Are we the ones who are lurking and reading? Are we the ones who are potentially about to join this particular group? So I actually don't know who this we is yet. And I'm wondering whether that's an important question, but if it's blocking me from understanding and offering things, then it affects, what I do. So let me add that particular question.
I'd love to respond to that with a sort of an unpacking, because I don't have the answer for you, but I have an unpacking of that. I don't believe that the we is something that's defined. It's something that is de facto emergent. That it's a product and result of our collective, aggregated investment of attention and time. And that, and this is something that's really become more and more sort of energetically powerful for me just over the last 2 weeks, that mapping to we extended memes and things as attributes, as adoptions, as impositions, as frameworks, as whatever, that it's not a very good thing.
Wait, said that again?
That seeking things at the we level is almost in the immediate framing of it a setup for failure, because if the we is truly emergent, it is something that's constantly changing. People are joining it, people are leaving it, it's shifting shape, it's shifting energy, it's shifting focus, it's shifting on a constant steady state basis. There's no static we. And it's sort of the same meme when you raise the idea of the 4 promises, right? Do we want to adopt the 4 promises? And the truth of the matter is that the next second after the we goes yes to 4 promises, the we changes. And somebody else pops in, and it's no longer an agreement of the we. The we sort of becomes this illusion that what I realized for me experientially is that psychologically and emotionally, it provides a pass to get out of responsibility, consciousness, awareness in the moment. Because there's a we that I can shift that to, I can dump that on, and I can sort of take the vacation, or I can check out, or I can, get lazy. And I think sort of contemporaneous with the hobby horse mantra I have of enfranchisement and empowerment and inclusion. There's a flip side to that, which is whatever we're doing is a co-created thing, moment to moment, and ideally, nobody should really check out. Nobody should really sort of lose the immediacy of that if it can be avoided. If they can, if the contract, if the contract, the social contract, but also the construct is about staying in the game. It's about staying present, staying connected, staying in attention, and we really it's a really slippery, slow Patrick thing. I think the we is probably responsible for the 99-1 principle, which is it gives the 90% that register but never show up, participate, or contribute the license and pass to say, don't have to because I registered, I'm part of it.
So can I respond to that?
Sure, sure.
I think I see a lot of sense in what you say if we assume that we are doing we the old way. What I'm asking is, how do we do we a new way? Like your question, right? So rather than the village metaphor, which I love and I've used often, as you were speaking, I was thinking more of a city metaphor. That if we were a city, not all of us are involved in building, the Embarcadero building. Only some of us are. Not all of us are involved in building, Central Park. Only some of us are. Not all of us are involved in building any of the protocols that then try to guide us. Guide not necessarily in the old sense, but hopefully we can think of that as guide in the new sense. So there are ways that each of us contribute because each of us has a different set of skills, values, knowledge, etc. And not every project requires everyone to be active. So that's why I'm thinking more about that city metaphor. And in that sense, when we talk about we, as those occupants of the city, yeah, there is no common, easily identifiable manifesto for all of us that say this is who we are. We're just those of us who are here. And we select by driving our automobiles to a different city or driving into this city or walking, whatever that metaphor is. So from that standpoint, I get it. It's also, I think, consistent with this confederation notion that we're loosely connected, that each of us is doing our thing. And if we find opportunities to support each other, that's great. But occasionally there will be stronger opportunities where we can be more intentional, more focused, spend more energy for a focused amount of time to create an Empire State Building or a city park. I think all of that is in the mix. So what I'm trying to figure out now is, what is this? What is the barn that we're trying to create? I don't think it's yet San Francisco, right? I'm not that grandiose. I'm trying to figure out, can we put together a barn with a few walls that, won't fall down within the next year? And what might that be? And can we ask it from that standpoint? Because if we're always asking this, hey, we're going to change from day to day, everything's going to be in flux. Yes, it's clearly a state of where we are. But is that where we want to sit day in, day out? Or do we want to create something? Do we want to create a barn? Is there a barn here that needs to be raised? Over. By the way, that was not one meme. I apologize. That was more memes.
I remember one of the earliest. You said something about the confederation of purpose. So that came to me now, which is sort of the totality of all the purposes of the individuals, and then the totality of the teams and their interests, and it will. So on one level, you have each of us, and then you have maybe even the submodalities of each of us, because we're sort of, different things. Then we have the group, which is gathered in the Zoom. Then we have the group on the Facebook. But then we also have the other groups, like growing systems of success and ecology of systems thinking, and maybe even groups like United Earth, and which working in a similar direction. So maybe what I could imagine as the barn would maybe be something which could a frame of mind or something that can include all that without it being a problem.
Let me see if I understand you, Glenn. Are you talking about in each of these words is going to sound wrong. Is it an index? Is it a map? Is it a list? Is it a picture? Is it a set of connections?
Yeah, well, I would, if you want to visually represent it, I would see a larger circle with many smaller circles inside of them, and smaller circles inside of them as well. But clearly also it's a philosophy, it's a mindset, it's a way of thinking, a perspective. Maybe we could call it a multi-dimensional perspective, which can have this fluency, but can also have a more structured we in certain situations or certain periods of time. It could be structured around projects, for example. So that could be a meaningful we, but it's still just one part of something much larger which it serves. And the slippery path which Doug mentioned is, as I hear it, I think about group identity and all of the problems that have gone along with that. And that's, I think it's also very typical problems of pioneers and maybe people somewhat similar to us. So it's an important issue. Is it possible to figure out a sort of perspective, but also perhaps also specifically an operating system, an index, etc., which can support a multi-dimensional perspective on we and many we's, and yeah. What you said about confederation of purpose, you said that in one of the earliest group conversations. That sounded a lot up this alley. Yeah.
I think there is a barn. But the barn is not prescriptive or directive, it's facilitative. So through a human experiential lens, what are all the things that could be automated and operating behind the scenes to serve and support human beings' coming together in joint endeavor. And so it's a new kind of machine. That was sort of the original conception, the reason for the construct of the machine works. And that there were these layers of affordance or sensing awareness built into it, all of them stacked up and running three-dimensionally, that were designed to be in service to the individual, each individual on that individual's terms, and to serve the collective in those areas and functions where the expression or affordance called for is in service to collective generativity. So, but the operating sort of vision is very mechanical in the sense that it's about mechanical affordances, automation affordances, and services to the human beings working together. And that it truly is a universal service platform, virtual environment space where individuals can go, where groups of individuals can go, where an organization can go, where it serves all of the things that go on in those units. So it has project support affordances for project type things. And it has an array of affordances and services for the social and communication and exchange type stuff. And it has repository and capture functionality for the artifacts and data that is generated along the way and that needs to be made available, accessible contextually when and as valuable and needed. So that's the vision that I sort of hold around this idea, but that it and that probably the dimensions of it that are really, I think, probably new relative to the standard sort of platform or application mentality of yesterday is that there's a lot of engineering and design in the sensing mechanisms to know where an individual is at in real time, emotionally, experientially, conceptually, that we can know that, and that there can be affordances triggered based on what human beings are communicating, sharing, or projecting energy-wise and emotionally in their experience in the space, if that makes sense. And so the idea is that there's a whole rich layer of signaling and affordances on the back end of that signaling for the individual, for the collective relative to an individual, to handle 6 ways to Sunday all of the human being to human being types of things that happen that are part of us being human beings. And doing it in a place that comes from a prioritization of human beings, inclusion, unconditional love, caring, support as a value set underpinning it. So there is a kind of values mediation in terms of what it's seeking, the level at which it's seeking to play, for want of a better way of putting it. But there's no spin on that. It never loses sight of its boundary in terms of treading into the discretionary or the domain of man, for want of a better way of putting it, the domain of the human beings making choices, decisions, and being the ones driving the ship. The platform is sub that. It's just primitive enough to stay below that domain. So that makes it the universal tool. That's what enables it to serve anybody and everybody for whatever purpose. That's the vision. That's the barn.
So let me try that, because as you were speaking, a lot of different images and possibilities popped into my head. If you're speaking, let's say you see me on the screen, and next to me, in various different panels or applets or whatever, you can see my confusion state or my understanding state, my happiness state. You can see, how many minutes before I have to go pee. You can see, this action item that has to come up at 10 o'clock that's on the back of my mind that's, kind of affecting my attention. It's all that stuff, right? That gives you a sense of, am I grokking what you're saying, or am I checked out doing something else, right? That's one set of images that came to mind as you were talking. So well, that's interesting. It raises technology questions as well as privacy questions, as well as trust questions, as well as everything. I mean, imagine getting bombarded by this if you're speaking to a group of 60 people, right? And you're seeing 60 such, dashboards. I can see Tammy's, I see Glenn's, I see Gavin's, I see me, I see you, blah, blah, blah.
Well, remember, each individual is the master of their projection and their signaling. Mm-hmm. So you may have somebody sitting there where you're getting nothing. You may have somebody else sitting there who filled out every blank on the registration onboarding affordance provided, which was in service to giving people in the collective as much information as possible. So you could see that whole layer, and then you could see yes to everything. Like anything you can pick up on me, you can project on me. So each individual is going to define that for themselves. They have control over that. That's their...
And the destination of it too, right? Like
absolutely.
I'm going to show you, certain items, but I may not show
absolutely
over there, blah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's an interesting barn. How do we take a step towards a foundation for that barn?
Well, the doc that I shared was an attempt at starting like the surface, but defining sort of dimensional layers of operability. Right? Like, I think we hit some of the bigger boulders on that list, but each one of them, parses down and starts getting drilled down and broken up into the fine tuning. And to your point about how do we start, and we don't have to stand up the fully realized 50,000 square foot barn. It may be a service building dimension of the barn with 3 walls. That list is sort of trying to get the beginning pieces.
The minimum viable barn.
Minimum viable barn. And I think there's plug and play, by the way, with a lot of your stuff and others in terms of, there's a thing on that list called data. And then there's another thing on that list, separate and apart, another layer, operable layer, which is data flows. Right? So, I suspect like there are chunks of your 6 outstanding, things that you've sort of architected in your mind as pieces of the machinery that could be plugged in and advance that blueprint, literally just capitalize on it all and plug and play. And there are others with other pieces.
So this is beginning to excite me no end, but let me make sure that Tammy and Glenn feel they need to chime in here.
Makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, this is just the kind of stuff that I'm thinking about too.
I've got a bit of a stack. So in terms of the we, I'm gonna say something super cheesy. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. there's this, I think, inner knowing in many, many people all over the world that, as Doug says, we need to do us differently. We need systems that are human-centered. And the time and attention piece, obviously, participating in the video conversations is quite a time commitment, especially if you also commit to reviewing them and gaining the insights that we can get through really paying attention to how we interact. So those have been really powerful for me and for many others, I think. Our stuff is getting like quite a bit of regular views from folks, and that feels like we're creating something that is giving people other tools that they can take away. So in part, for me, the barn is about creating those protocols and ways of relating and connecting information. And yeah, I have, tons of different little parts of the barn, but they don't make sense unless they're in relationship with the people and the barn and the purpose. So, I feel it's really important it's like we've got this sort of 52 card pickup thing going on in many ways. It's like, okay, this is the way the world has been. These are the things that make me freak out about the world as it's been. And how can we create systems differently as well as be different in those systems? And a big chunk of it is receiving each other's work, having the bandwidth to be able to really understand. So Sam, in response to your some of the pieces that you bring around really wanting to integrate your prior work here and looking for the places to plug and play that, the suggestion of working on an onboarding style of process for us, I think, is a great place to be able to set a concrete foundation into our process. So I would love to have this group and Sam in particular feed in some of those pieces, because a lot of those pieces are foundational, right? And I think that's part of why you bring up the foundation, is like you're holding those pieces of foundation. And I just really encourage you, Sam, to just lay it out. Part of it is how we communicate. All of those different pieces that you bring. And it's interesting to me how part of the human to human affordances is when someone says, when someone else advocates for another person's piece, that is a human affordance in what we're looking to build. So this is, this feeds into relationship. It feeds into, sorry, what's the word for how you're seen in the world? I'm looking for your reputation, right? So the pieces that you've brought kind of precede you, and people are picking up in some of those pieces, and when they're responded to, because some of the sensitivities and that I've felt in your presence is around having people pick your stuff up, right? And so there's an interactive element to that. There's laying them out, and then there's other people saying, yes, that's important. And then feeling that you have the space to be able to really walk those things in. And so there are tensions around there, because what it is that we're doing is kind of vying for the time and attention in this old system way. And so I'd encourage us to kind of have our eyes on that so that we do that differently, because in a sense, I feel like we have all the time in the world, you know, and literally we have millions, hundreds of millions, definitely hundreds of thousands of people pushing in a similar direction. And each one of those people's time and attention is something, is a part of the empowerment that we're all experiencing. But we don't necessarily have a frame of reference to know what that explosion of awesome is going to look like in actuality. And so, yeah, part of the barn is to care and receive and promote, and as a process of sense making, we're trying to make sense of this. You know, what is it that we need to create? And, you know, some of the elements of my barn is we opt in, we choose. You know, we consciously choose to invest our time and attention exactly how and where we want to. And so there's a sovereignty that I think is really important for us to be with and express, be a place to express from, as well as what do we do with the artifacts. I think it's a beautiful place to look at tangible agreements that we can build together to create spaces for consent, for dissent, for kind of taking apart how we tell our story into just a process where we can empower ourselves. You know, in telling our story, we empower ourselves. So how do we choose to tell our story? And I'll just wrap with one of the pieces around the unblocking that I most appreciated was having our head on the human condition elements that hold us back, so that we can use some relational shorthand with each other, not necessarily to call each other out, but to give each other the space to be able to do us differently, as Doug says, you know, to be like, oh, wait, hold on, you know, I've seen this pattern before, and it would be great if rather than stopping there, you just, you know, get your stuff out there, for example. And it's these kind of caring ways that we choose to do that help us to create that space of welcome, and to sense as a group what barriers are kind of gefuggling up the works. And with that, I'll pass it on.
There were a bunch of things that I want to share that Tammy, that you sort of like, you know, you were flipping switches. I wanted to share one thing that is a sort of emergent pull, like example of an emergent thing. Lucy Rist popped up to me on an IM in response to the Sunday session, sharing all these things about her experience of it and whatever. And she ended with a question. And I said, I really think this, you know, if you would be willing, this would be great to bring to the thread, is I think a lot of people would appreciate receiving and also responding to what you shared, but also what you've asked. And it did actually end up spawning, that thing about tipping into the processing, individual stuff and the processing. But, she was like, that's great, and made that shift. And which I thanked her for, because it's not required, and it is an escalation of sort of intention and power from a contribution place, and also an escalation of exposure in terms of the sharing, all of that. So I think there are a lot of people that, but for the invitation or the encouragement, would be playing. And I think a big part of that 90% passive phenomena is because people really have fear and self-doubt or question about, good enough, wise enough, know how to, don't want to make mistakes, all of this stuff. And the thing that Lucy raised specifically was that she got a real sense of safety in the Sunday exchange. And so that's one piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle you raised is that thing about sharing work, getting stuff out. And the old paradigm, which is doing that in the context of competing for people's time and attention. Like, I'm in the marketplace and everybody's waving a flag, buy mine, buy mine. And it's, that's the gestalt, right? And doing that differently is a very fine shadow line of when something is here, I want to get this on the table for people to consider, to I'm selling, right? Like mine. And it's a unilateral, one-directional kind of intentionality and flow and all of the rest. That's a really tricky thing. I like the GSS for me, and this is like completely my subjective gestalt and reactivity to, somebody committed to an epistemology, to a thing, to a name. And I've not, at least to date, been able to get past my reactivity to the GSS being the dominant piece, and then the projects or things using the GSS as the substantive projects and agendas of folks. I've never gotten past the dominant theme to the substantive projects, because the sort of the push behind the GSS piece has always been a block for me or a turnoff for me. Challenging, because I love Michael. I love the folks that are into using that frame and applying it to and I get senses of the things they're applying it to are really cool. And I'm like, but it's a hurdle, which is that thing about a tool is a tool is a tool. I'm very, very sensitive to, like, tell me I have to use that tool and I'm probably not going to play. Just, the little kid part. So I think that's probably worth its own thread and a half, its own, like, sprout, fork, whatever, is how to shift those things. And I love the fact that Desiderama was open, that she went to the place of saying, there's something here that we stand that's of value. Like, it was like, what is this about? That's our tribe. That's our tribe. but to your point, Sam, earlier about like some people are for this and some people are for that. Some people like doing these things, some people like doing those things, and not everything is for everybody is also very real and very true. And her curiosity for her, bringing her into our conversation frame, is something Michael may not. And I think Heiner is the perfect example of somebody with feet in both places, where on one hand it's like, let's get the show on, and on the other hand, I love this. And it's like, so if each person is enabled to define themselves and what they like and don't, and it's all good, whatever that is good, works. It's aggregative and contributive. That's the barn. Enables that to happen, that to be okay, that to be valued. So there's a lot more moving parts in this thing than just a platform or an app. It's much more, built for quantum computing capability, built for three-dimensional stuff that's coming that hasn't even been, designed yet. And I'm complete.
So what I'm hearing here is I think about multidimensionality, like this GSS. That's one conceptual framework, and some people have been involved and looked at this framework, and that was actually one of the first groups that I joined before I joined this, where I really felt many were working on the stuff that I wanted to work on too. But the barn that I see here is something far greater, which can have space for each single one of those particular schools of knowledge, those tools, those methods, those individual preferences, and that each human being personally at any moment will choose what to do and what projects to focus on, what activities to be involved in. So the system around has to have so much space that it's that every, like you say, all is good. I like that. It's like every contribution, either it's good or it's potentially good. Let's put it that way. It's good in itself, and then a specific situation will decide exactly what to be done. And in that situation, you can take inspiration from this place and this place and this place and this place. But the problem, which is or the boundary, like Michael Josefowicz, he talks a lot about these boundaries, and that's time, energy, attention. This fact that you can't be many places at once, so you have to choose. And at the moment, one of my frustrations is that I feel that I'm in this sea of unbelievable amounts of fantastically interesting stuff, and I have like a list of 500 fantastically interesting things I could be doing today, and it's somewhat psychologically overwhelming, and that is a problem. I think it's a challenge, maybe it's better, but it's a very real one, and it's probably very unique to the day and age we're living in now. So that also has to be addressed. Somehow there's a certain personal discipline which is needed, where you kind of have to make a choice to focus on certain things. And for me, the one thing which interested me especially about this group is the video conversations, because I feel for me that that is the most valuable use of time, because it's one process which has many different valuable results in all directions, and it's real time, but it's also asynchronous because it can be reviewed, and then later on, as the technology is better, then this conversation will naturally give rise to a lot of very valuable written data, etc. And as you say, each person in the ideal system will choose what to do with their part. That seems, yeah, that seems very clear. So, but for me at least, this process itself, the collaborative process or the talking process, that's really where, for me, it's almost the center of the mandala, so to say. It's actually right here, what we're doing now and how this is being played out. And the sort of larger system, there will be different players specializing in different fields, and sometimes there's larger cooperations, sometimes smaller, and this is the sort of natural dynamic. And that goes back to this we, which was mentioned earlier, and how the traditional way of thinking about that we are in this little group and this group has this and that method, and that's sort of a constraint which I don't think that's so important. It's more important that human beings, they're specific human beings, and each one will decide their level of involvement and their priorities and where to focus their energy. And the restraint is always that you can't be many places at the same time. So, and that is a real constraint, and there's some kind of real discipline each of us has to find for ourselves, but maybe we can help and develop tools for it. Yeah. So that's just a few aspects of this.
So this is the moment in the meeting where I disagree, and I'm going to do it again. I think that there are agreements we've tacitly accepted. We've agreed to all be recorded on video. We've all agreed to post these videos up on YouTube. We've all agreed to come and listen to each other. We've all agreed to, as appropriate, bring our offerings to each other. We've all agreed to interact with each other on Facebook. We've all agreed to, respond to people's threads, etc. There are a number of things that are useful. And if we decide to change any one of them, there is a shift that basically others will have to make. If, let's say, today I decide not to put this YouTube video up on YouTube, but I put it on Vimeo, okay, for whatever reason, right? There's a shift, and it will cause, some minor confusion. Some people are going to have to look a little bit, and, so the question is, does that serve the group? These conventions and protocols are useful because they are intended to try and get the group to interact more. And it's with that intent that there are offerings like, what is the foundation? What are the how-tos? Who are we? What are our values? Those questions. How do we want to communicate with each other? Do we want to interrupt each other? Do we want to take notes? Do we want to share these elsewhere? You know, I think each of us is asking these questions to try and help the community, help the group. I don't think there's a strong sense of selling here. You know, I don't see Doug selling CMM, and I hope you don't see me selling these ideas here. These are intended to try and help the group. And it's precisely because I don't want to appear selling that I'm not pushing it so strongly. You know, I have license, as some of you have indicated, to say, hey, go create those how-tos. And I've done so. I've drafted up, you know, probably more than half a dozen. But I'm not here hammering anybody on the head saying, please use this how-to. I'm just suggesting it, offering it, saying, is this useful? Are these, you know, things that we have talked about before? And is this an attempt to capture what it is we've talked about? So I think that this notion of not having conventions, not having protocols, not having written artifacts, you know, I think there's, in my response to it, and could be where I'm getting triggered, okay, so help me with this, is that every time I hear that, you know, maybe there's not a similar appreciation for writing down some of these perceived conventions or perceived practice. And so I'm wondering what is behind that. Is it just my fear? Is it that people actually don't think that's useful? Is it that, you know, people are here to hang, be with each other, and that's sufficient? You know, I don't know. If that last piece is the way it is, then like I said before, a lot of these conventions, written artifacts, etc., are not that important. If we're just here every, you know, twice a week, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, just to hang with each other and ask these questions, that's okay too. But in the Facebook thread, we clearly see people asking some questions. How's a new member going to understand this? You know, what is that experience of a new member coming on to this group? You know, do we throw 127 videos at them and say, hey, this is us? Or do we give them a guided tour through 1 or 2 or 3 of these things? Or do we spend a half an hour understanding their work and then maybe 90 minutes introducing them to, here's Doug, here's Glenn, here's Tammy, here's Sam, here's Gavin, here's Heiner, blah, 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 okay? There's a number of ways to do that. And each of us, if we do that in our own way, will give a different experience to that member that we are onboarding. Maybe that's okay. But maybe somebody who is onboarded by Tammy will meet a person who's onboarded by Doug, and they're going to say, whoa, you mean that's what it's all about? Wait, this is what it's all about, you know? And maybe that's okay too. But I'm just trying to ask those questions of, is that what we want, you know? And so I do want to go back to this how-to question, because one of the how-tos is, you know, how do we even identify who we are? You know, that's been a question that's been ongoing ever since September or whatever, you know, that we've gotten here. How do we make decisions? How do we even decide what to do with these artifacts? You know, even Tammy's got one about how we license these works. So I do think that every time we come up, every time this GCC abuts another group, whether it's a GSS or whether it's a ecological thing, a systems thinking guys, or whether it's something else, they will ask certain questions. It's almost completely expected. And every time we're here saying, we don't have it, we don't have it. We've decided it's not that important. We've decided, you know, we're going to do other things, you know? So I'm just reflecting that every time we want to go out there, every time somebody finds us, we have these questions. And I'm going to ask again, you know, is this part of the barn we want to raise? And I know there's a reticence to having an identity. Identities are not constricting. They don't have to be. We can construct something that's actually much more enabling and empowering. So when we talk about ways of old being restricting us, that's where I think we want to be sensitive. Not everything that has been created heretofore is useless. And throwing it all out and starting anew, yeah, we can do that, but it'll take us a while. Where we can learn from past systems and adapt them to the new values that we have is a skill we're trying to develop. And we don't even know what those values are yet. So we're looking at the values, we're looking at the tools, we're looking at our practices, we're looking at their constructs, we're looking at the barn, and all of that, you know, as Tammy says, we're trying to, you know, do all at the same time. That's a hard thing. And we talk at cross purposes because, you know, when I'm saying something, maybe it's, you know, addressing a key component at the values level. But when somebody else says something, it's at the protocol level. And when somebody else says something, it's at the, you know, boundary object level, you know? And until we have a common vocabulary with some common terms and a common, you know, cognition framework and a common, you know, mental model, this is going to take a long time. And it's already, what, 4 months in? And I think we've made some progress. We made some really good progress. We seem to be attracting people. That's the funny thing. But, you know, we don't necessarily move much beyond being able to answer some of those questions, or at least provide a guided tour through some of those questions. And that guided tour, if you're asking me to take on onboarding, is exactly what I'm trying to say, hey, you know, what does that need? What is foundational to that? And sort of then looking at what are the building blocks. And that's why I'm asking these questions. Over.
I really liked all of that, by the way. There's nothing there I disagree with. It's a good question because there's some situations that come up again and again. Like someone asks, "What do you do?" and you have a good answer to give. I would really like to see that also as a part of this. And today I read something that Doug wrote in that thread, and I thought that was wonderful. And I copied it in a document, and that's maybe one example of one of those written artifacts that can come out of the process, and we can share it with each other and have that available as a possible answer when someone asks. So yes, I totally think that should be a part of the barn.
I'm going to tell one more story. Okay. That is, again, feel free to judge me, but a long time ago, I used to work for a company in the defense business. The company was called TRW, and the subsidiary was called ESL. It stood for Electromagnetic Systems Laboratory. Why am I telling this story? Well, typical systems that the military buys, you know, if they buy in bulk, you know, they're going to go hundreds of locations, maybe thousands, maybe to millions of users, okay? Because it's a new canteen or it's a new boat, a boot or whatever it is, okay? And some weapon systems are going to go to hundreds of thousands of regiments or whatever. I wasn't building weapons, by the way. I just want to use that metaphor. But the one project I remember very, very distinctly was to put together pretty much every data source that belonged to this one particular agency. And it included mapping, it included documents, it included messaging, it included signal information, it included terrain information, salinity in oceans, it included temperature information, flow of water, it included road networks, it included slope information. And the whole point was, we were not building this for lots of users. We were building this for one user. The method behind the madness was, if we could enable one person to use all of this power to do something that had never been done before by anyone, which is to find a threat before it finds us, then arguably that's useful. It secures our safety. You know, you could argue that. So there's a range of kinds of things we can build. There's a kind of barn where everybody gets one, and it's got 4 sides, it's got a door, it's got a bunch of cows in it. You know, everybody needs one of those. Okay, you could say. But there's this other thing where you're not going to build a bunch of them, but you're going to build one, and that already is going to change what we can do collectively. There's a spectrum of what we can do together. And there is a role for building things for everyone and accepting everyone's contribution. There's a role for the kind of things that you can only do one time. You know, it's a Manhattan Project kind of a method. And I don't want to lose that either, because that is also part of our collective capability. And for those of people in the systems community or in the collaboration business or in the organizational design business, there are things on this side of the spectrum where they're not going to be used by everybody, but they will increase our collective capability. Okay, so maybe there's some elitism here. Maybe there's some, 1 percentile thinking here, but the capability we magnify at that end of the spectrum cannot be disregarded. It is still valuable. Those are the people that come up with things that we read for hundreds of years. Those are the people that build technology that 8 billion people use. Those are the kind of insights that guide humanity for eons. So I don't want to lose sight of them. So when we talk about building knowledge constructs from the raw record, or building these associations, or creating artifacts, or learning how to make decisions together, or learning how to string together autonomous groups so that we actually have some concerted, coordinated activity, don't read that as old school. Don't read that as necessarily patriarchal or hierarchical if it is intended to still provide the community with more capability and more benefits than would otherwise have been. And it's in that sense that I want to introduce again the dynamic knowledge repository ideas, the global sim ideas, the mentor ideas, and really say, maybe these are not for everyone, but they are going to increase what we as a community are capable of. Let me end there for now. Over.
Can you shift your camera a little bit so it's not taking in quite as much as the window so we can see your face a bit better there, Sam? Other way.
So I want to respond to where you started. Within the sort of human being centered construct, there are those for whom all of the things that are major priority for you are the same. And on the other end of the bell curve, there are people for whom they could care less. And the call to action for me is, within that context, our mission, should we decide to accept it, is to enable both of them to contribute the maximum potential generativity they can bring in whatever way, shape, form that takes through their time and attention, and that as much as humanly possible, there should be no barrier to entry to either, and there should be maximum facilitation, affordance within our power, generative powers, creative powers, innovation powers to create, to enable them and facilitate them being maximally generative and contributive in their way, shape, form. And so Glenn, when you mentioned before, there's all this stuff and it's overwhelming, I look at it as, well, if we can just make it much easier for you to cover more ground, then we're serving you. So instead of you having to worry about technology and applications and platforms and protocols and, over here I scratch with my right hand and over here I have to scratch with my left and there I have to jump up and down 3 times and twist around before I whatever, that if we can make it so that you can just get to work, you can just get to engagement and contribution in your way, shape, form, in the way that's most comfortable for you. That's sort of this technology, architecture, design meets unconditional love, right? so the protocol piece of it to me is, if Desar Rama wants to use GSS and I don't, we both experientially should be able to collaborate together, me through my apps and lenses and preferences and her through hers, and that doesn't get in the way or interfere with me contributing to her and her contributing to me and both of us contributing to Michael and so forth. So it's not a binary or either or, it's and. And all of those drivers or imperatives, passions that each of us bring to our piece of the puzzle. You know, there's a line in that CMM paper relating to communication modalities, and there's a dedicated thing related to this kind of video conversation thing, and a whole extension and drill down where I see Tammy having a whole plug and play, like bam, like here are all the moving parts and architectures and affordances of that. And Glenn having a piece of that, which is, here's the convert to transcript and then analyze keyword and, you know, advanced text recognition, pattern matching, and lexicon development for these three words together means this, or, you know, evokes this for future reference, right? All the tagging and contextualizing on the fly in real time. Evolving a rights thing that speaks to Tammy's thing about sovereignty and control over creative product, but doing it not in the old IP paradigm, doing it new, right? So I really think I've never found a question or challenge in thinking about this that if I anchor in the human being experiential frame, the answer isn't there for me. And the only other reference that I'll turn to where that isn't to fit is nature. In terms of this emergent, organic, ecosystemic orientation to the pieces, to the holons. And that those two things as sort of guiding principles really can inform like what the it is for me in a lot of the questions, Sam, that you raised. And I loved your answer when somebody says, what are you? And you said, we're sort of in process on that. Don't have an answer yet, but we're working on it. And I think it is an emergent thing, right? I took that stab at sort of breaking out from an emergent lens what I saw happening in terms of Tuesdays this, Thursdays that, Sundays this, and we're sensing, feeling our way. I took it as far as like I could take it as a first stab, but I think we are emerging that definitions, and we're hardening it up, but emergently and organically. And so I'm sort of okay with it. Is it taking a minute? Yeah. But I also have a feeling, because nature works this way and we're sort of in alignment with the natural process, that there are exponential potentials and effects. Like as we begin to harden up, as we begin to become less anti-fragile in what's accruing here, that it's going to start moving faster in all of these dimensions. It's going to pick up pace. And if it draws more people, more time and attention, that'll also, I think, accelerate process and definition and drill down and, getting to where the rubber meets the road and the nuts and the bolts and the mechanics of all this.
You're muted still, Doug.
Gavin, are you there? If you can and want to chime in, we'd love to hear from you.
I am. Can you hear me okay? Can everyone hear me okay?
It's breaking up a little bit, but we're getting.
Yes, thank you very much. Cool. Okay. Let me just try and see if I can adjust volume here. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. Just a couple of very, very quick thoughts, and that is, again, apologies by sort of not being completely up to speed. I've started writing rather a sort of crazy document called an IPO, and so it's been taking up a bit of time, but inspired by earlier conversations about math, I like a rough one-page map, just a really simple, kind of 2D thing, and I found it really helpful in terms of how I'm trying to put the pieces together. And of course, I recognize exactly what everyone's been saying, about, basically the art and science of amazing synergy amongst so many of this group and wider. So I guess what I wanted to ask is on the topic of might we call them sort of synergy protocols? I just sense that mapping can be really helpful. So that if there's like just this one page, that's just got, just a representation of, how each of us is kind of weaving our different threads, and how we're attempting to do that in such a way that the whole is way greater than the sum of the parts, and so that when in conversation with others and kind of sharing each other's maps, I think the one of the ways that it can be further enriched is that because you're not just seeing on these maps, like project names, for example, or product names or platform names or what have you. These maps also give, real, I think, quite a rich sense of intention, and sort of motivations and values. And so that's why sort of one of the pieces of this crazy sort of tapestry I'm attempting to put together is I'm calling it, it's a bit of a long working title, but it's a hierarchy of needs, values, and assets, and that would be part of something that I'm calling a One Wealth map, because basically this say crazy IPO document is what I'm calling an inclusive planetary offering, and it sounds mad and crazy, but because there are so many amazing people out there doing stuff like you guys are doing, I wanted to find a way to put something together that could channel various resources, appropriate resources your way, you know. And one of those is through what I call One Wealth Fund, through a One Wealth Bank. But the point is that it's not until each person is sharing their, you know, map that people will kind of get, okay, so I can see where, you know, this piece and this piece could fit pretty well with what I'm doing, and here's my map, and let's overlay them and see, you know. And so I'm speaking on Friday with the the new mapping people, who I'm guessing you're familiar with, because one of our overlaps is related to the infinite game, and basically sort of game shifting from finite games, you know, to the infinite game. And again, you know, there'll be lots of different expressions, as there should be, but they're keen to have a conversation about Genius OS, as is, you know, another sort of group which is sort of working on this sort of planetary operating system sort of platform, and you know, hooking in with the holochain folks and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so that's a bit of a rambling answer there, but yeah, thanks all for sharing. And I also appreciate the prompt at the start, where I caught just at the start Doug basically sharing with Sam, look, you know, you have the floor, you know, bring it on. Bring all the pieces together, and so I've seen a couple of Sam's maps in the past, and so I would have found it doubly useful if Sam, and I know that I missed most of it unfortunately because of my computer problems, but if Sam had like this one-page map up there, and he was, you know, drawing these and you could see the sort of connections, how he sort of wiring his brain, if you like. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for the moment. Oh, and last thing, actually, CMM, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet, Doug. I guess it's been posted in the Facebook, you know, the GCC Facebook group. Your CMM's white paper, or
I think actually I shared the link in a conversation thread, in the chat of the conversation thread. I don't think it was shared on the Facebook, through the Facebook channel. But, you know, maybe that's something I sort of did a test bed with the folks on the call to say, you know, is this something to take larger, to you know, to broadcast more widely or not? And how does this strike people? Because I didn't want to presume it worked for anybody. But I'm open to that idea of sort of opening it up and more broadly exposing it if folks collectively think that makes sense. And the second part, and the second part of that is, how do we want to contextualize that sharing? Because it's a protocol that we would be using with a lot of SAM stuff and other stuff to come. So it's a practice thing that you know, we should, you know, figure out.
Thank you. And last quick point, which was CMM, reminded me of an acronym that stands for Capability Maturity Model.
Yeah, in this case, it stands for Collective Metacognition Machine Works.
Cool.
And sorry, what you said again, Gavin?
Capability Maturity Model. There's a CMMI, which was from Carnegie, I think, Carnegie Mellon, where
it's a software
capability maturity model integration. Yeah,
rates people level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as far as their sophistication in developing software.
I see some good overlap in the meaning of those words.
Yeah. So, Gavin, hey, I really want to thank you for bringing that. I missed a bunch of it because I was having computer problems, but the premise for this particular Tuesday discussions was for people like you, like Doug, like Tammy, like Heiner, like Glenn, like me, to bring our pieces together and sort of figure out, is there a game we can play? Can we fit them together? Can we build the shims? Do we have the bolts to actually, or is Doug's on metric and mine's on, some other system? How do we actually get those plugging together so they can be complementary, mutually supportive, mutually operational, reinforcing? That's kind of the premise, I think, if I recall correctly, for how we get these Tuesday conversations kicked off. And I think we're still in the figuring out stage of how to even have that conversation, is do we do it in presentations? Do we do it in this emergent dialogue? Do we do it by saying, here's a barn, how do each of us bring our tool set to that barn? I think we're still trying to figure out how to have that conversation.
Can I just quickly respond to that, Sam? Just by saying that, whenever it is, appropriate, I've got this, simple 2D one-page map that, whenever anyone might want to see it, I'm happy to kind of talk through it in a sort of overview fashion. Because if it was received just cold, it'd be like, oh my goodness, what the heck is this? So.
I would say, just as Doug gave me the opportunity in the floor, you should feel free to contribute when you think it's timely and when you think it's appropriate. And then it's up to us to have the generosity to actually read it. I haven't yet had the generosity to actually read Doug's CMM paper yet, for which I feel badly, and I'm going to flog myself, for the record. And then I'm going to go back, later on today and actually try to find it. But similar to you, Gavin, I want to do the same thing, which, by the way, reminds me of something I call the smart people problem number 2. And this is essentially what I'm trying to figure out, and hopefully you guys can help figure this out or tell me that it's the wrong question, is there's a classic, almost stereotypically dismissive notion, this phrase called design by committee, right? We've all heard that phrase, which usually implies, hey, everybody's had their say, it's, overly complex, it takes too long, and it's hard to figure out what it's trying to do. And that's the problem I'm trying to figure out whether we can overcome. Can we collaborate in such a way that nobody says, oh, geez, that was just designed by committee, with all the negative connotations of that particular phrase? So I'm trying to figure out whether we can actually, and by the way, Ted Nelson, who, along with Doug, worked on hypertext, way a long time ago, 50 years ago. Ted strongly believes that his genius is capable because he works alone. And no one has disproved Ted. No one has actually ever said, well, here's a collaboration that actually produced something better than any single individual has ever produced. So he's very skeptical on this whole idea of scalable collaboration. I'm not that skeptical. I believe we can do it, but there's a lot of things we have to learn before we can do it. And that's why I'm really, really curious whether that, along with the bringing our tool sets together, can be essentially the driving questions that I'm going to have in the back of my mind for these Tuesday conversations. Over.
To that, I just have a little question. Do you feel that there is a very large similarity in the models that we've presented? I feel that when I hear what each person says, it's all, I wouldn't say it's almost the same thing, but it's some very striking similarities which go through it all. And And as you also mentioned, Sam, there's several agreements that we have already come to without any formal decision-making process. So how decisions are made, this is something I thought about the other day, and it suddenly came to me in a flash that decisions are made when all of the individuals in a certain constellation simply converge on a similar interest that they decide. Sometimes one person maybe expresses it in a way that all of the people are happy with, but there's striking similarities, really, and with the new map people. I mean, I've listened to a video where this guy from New Map talked, and I mean, that is very similar to the metacognition machine works and the system, the sort of multi-dimensional system. You know, there's many ways of saying it, but it's one pattern that I see go through all of this is that we're looking for something dynamic, agile, which on all levels can change. I hardly see anyone ever having disagreed with this. That it has to be all inclusive in the sense that every contribution from each individual can come into the common pool and be valuable. This also, as Doug calls it, human-centered. This is also something I see a very strong convergence around. But I've also noticed that it can be expressed in very many ways, and then one person will tend to emphasize this part and this part, but at least my impression when hearing this is that we're all saying almost the same thing or something very similar direction. Is that an impression you have too?
I'll share that. But I think that what sounds in alignment is high-level vision. When we actually get into implementation or somewhere close to the ground where we actually tread, the devil is in the details. You know, when you build a system, yes, you can say it needs to be a swing. Have you guys ever seen that poster? This is what the marketing guy thought. This is what the QA guy thought. This is what the CEO thought. This is what the VC thought. This is what the engineer thought. You know, everybody's got a different notion of what the swing is. So at a high level, yes, much of what we say is in alignment and in fact is coherent. But when we actually get down to actually trying to do something, those guiding principles, do we want to share? Do we want to use this particular tool? Do we want to do a metric versus, English? Do we want to use, do we want to gluten-free or not gluten-free? Those guiding principles affect what comes out on the other end. So we can't just talk at a high level, if we're actually trying to build something real. We have to talk at all levels. And that's where we then get into some differences in prioritization. We all fundamentally believe in the same good things. But the relative priority of things is actually kind of tricky to tease out sometimes. Do we value transparency over safety? We value both. But we can each imagine scenarios where one is tested against the other. And then do we understand in the same way? In some cases, there's this faction over here that values safety over transparency. There's another faction over here that values transparency over safety. Those are the interesting conversations to have. And if you have, in the traditional sense, a boss that says, this is the way things are prioritized, you go. You don't even have that conversation. In places like this, where we don't have a boss, we do end up having those conversations. And that, by the way, is some of the smart people problem number 2. For smart people to collaborate, we slow down. Which goes against the smart people's sense of urgency. Come on, I've got to do something by the end of the decade because we're going to hit that wall. Which is why I'm really curious about these questions about how would he successfully scale collaboration, or take collaboration and successfully scale it. And it's these kind of conversations which you may not end up having in more traditional organizations where here's your paycheck, you do it the way I tell you. Over for now. By the way, quick note, we're going up against, in 15 minutes, we'll be at 2 hours. I want to tell you that I apologize for my computer problems. I do think that the questions that get raised here, how do we get our contributions shared, discussed, fitted together, collaborating, reinforcing, that's still a conversation I don't yet know that we're able to have. We're still figuring out how to have that conversation. And part of my injection of that other notion about where we are at different parts of the spectrum is to figure out, where we are also, to have that conversation. Let me at least state for now, I think that where we are is a small group of people. We're trying to figure out how to build something that potentially could scale, but it needs to at least work for us. And it needs to reflect what we believe, the guiding principles, the guiding values, how we want to be with each other. And I would like to inject, and this is where I sense less of an agreement, I would like to inject that what it wants to do, this thing that we're trying to build, is giving us, the greater us, the big U, the big S, a collective capability that we have not had before. If we're just doing this just to recreate some capability we've already had, then, hey, people can disregard us. But we're trying to do something new. So that's why I wanted to inject this notion that could potentially be looked at as elitist. But it's trying to figure out what can we do that's new and different. Can we, as a small group, learn how to behave with each other and work together so that our result is better than any individual one of us could create, or better than any proper subset of us could create? That it draws on the strength of each of us, and that if we were to lose someone in this group, the eventual product would be lost. It would not be nearly as good. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Can we figure out how to work together to make that true? That's what's driving me. Over.
So I'll bring in one of Anna's pieces, which is about caring. And so part of the human interoperability piece is about us caring about each other, and the realization that we need to invest time and attention in each of us and care enough to continue to ask questions and clarify, as well as have the courage to really bring our pieces, not only in the ways that they can be best heard. And part of that is by reviewing how we're presenting, by and by modifying our approach according to the feedback that we're getting in real time. And so, part of what I'm hearing and have felt for some time being here is that we need to really invest in each other, specifically our time and attention. And while that brings challenges in terms of scale, if we don't get the model right, it doesn't matter what we scale. It probably won't scale if we don't actually get the model right. So in part, there's some pieces around doing deep dives on people's work that I recognize I haven't been able to devote as much of my time and attention and energy to, because I've had several other things going on in my life over the last 4 months that have drawn my attention away from doing that piece that I naturally bring. And so I've got some human life things that have constrained my ability to demonstrate that. But the point is not that I do it for me. The point is that we see the value in each other and follow that up with investments of time and energy into understanding each other's pieces, so that that can do those things in the same stack. You know, we're devoting that time and energy to receive or bringing in this dialogic space, so that it can be understood and interwoven with other people's contributions. And then that's an asynchronous demonstration of how we can cooperate together. And it's simply a just do it kind of thing. And I'm inspired to do a couple of things. One is to co-create, collaborate on what our sort of meet and greet, show and tell Fridays can look like, to help to bring an onboarding element to what we're doing. Because, you know, Sam, what you've been pointing to since, you know, before this project, literally, because you bring so much prior work in collaborology, is that we need that space to be able to, and those processes and protocols to bring our stuff and be able to share them. So I think, you know, there's a beautiful opportunity for us to, now that we've spent so much time together, we know a little bit about what we each bring. And Sam, many of your pieces are kind of sub-foundational in many ways. And so while ever it might not be perfect, and not everybody are using all of those pieces yet, having a one-page document that does say, these are the tools that we're using right now, as a place that people can kind of have a little written intro. I think that's important. That's something that's been talked about many times, and there are elements of those that have been created. That's one. And then there's creating small group deep dives, right? And just testing that model. And I'm inspired to suggest that 4 people exploring a person's thing can be a good number. Testing the different numbers of people participating in things is something that would be really interesting for us to explore, because each number of people has a different kind of vibe. But the small group ones can allow each voice to be heard, and a deeper dive to be given to a person. And, you know, part of it too is that there's so much richness and wisdom and knowledge, and that's our biggest problem, is we're too abundant with gifts to share with the collective. And this is the problem we tussle with, is, you know, how do we not only express, because there's one piece, right? And there's a lot of things that have to stand up at the same time. I have to be ready to say, and I have to be able to read my group well enough to know what can be received, right? And then there's the words that I'm using to express that are heard differently by others in the group, and potentially triggering a hold up, wait a minute. And, you know, it's these ways that we're basically testing these little tiny conversational tools that we use, while wrestling with the entire web of reality and potentiality that we're all sensing into. And so in terms of where the rubber meets the road in how we actually share our work together, I'm just going to suggest let's do that. Let's, you know, I think Fridays and a welcome session, ways for us to be able to tell our story. These are great little tools for us to pick up and say, okay, if I'm going to do a 2-minute piece about me, here it is. And it will change, as Gertrude was saying, you know, in some of the group work that she's been doing. It's different every time, not only because the people we're telling it to is different, because we're different. We've learned something different. We see ourselves differently. And I think that that practice can really help us, as well as doing deep dives. And so maybe that's a 5th day of the week for us to to be able to create some time for, and you know, demonstrate and test a model of what it is to really go deep and explore. And those pieces can then be shared to give more visibility and to allow a synchronous deposit of knowledge, wisdom, connection, generativity. And with that, I'm complete.
You know, a protocol piece came up for me while you were talking about how might Friday be done differently than it traditionally is, in terms of instead of a show and tell, if the approach was inquiry. And what I mean by that is that we have an asynchronous sharing homework. You know, pick a link, pick a doc, pick a thing, pick an artifact, whatever it is. And Friday's about bringing questions. And the only reason I'm suggesting that is because it stress tests a few things. First of all, it means that what is being shared to a greater or lesser extent is understandable, clear, you know, transferable, right, in part or in whole, to a greater or lesser extent. And if it's not, then that's really valuable information for the person who shared it to up their game and to figure out how to enrich it, how to improve it. Because in the long run, the goal for any artifact that we deem meaningful enough to share with each other is to end up with an artifact shareable at large, if the person wants to, and make sure that that artifact is as good as it can be to the widest audience possible, right? So this can be an actual rubber meets the road productive thing in terms of I have to go, I have to check it out. I come to Friday going, I got it, I didn't get it. And if I did get it, what questions did it raise for me, or what thoughts or generative stuff came up for whatever. So it makes it a real working thing. And also a harvesting of the time and attention invested in doing my own review leading into the session. So I toss that out as a idea, and you know, be curious what you guys think. And I'm complete.
I'd love to follow up on that. So if we're talking about the Friday session, that may be the place. I also very much agree with Tammy that we need to go into a deep dive into the work of specific people, because it is all very rich and connected thing, which it may take some time to come to get a sense of it. So my suggestion would be that on each session there is one person's work which we have a focus on, and then the other people there can do this inquiry, which you mentioned, and ask specific questions, but the theme is around one particular theme that that person wants to present for some reason or other. And the advantage of that is that then it won't really matter how many people show up, because that is somewhat unpredictable. That won't ruin the basic dynamic of having then one session to go to a deep dive into one very specific piece of work which one specific person would like to present. And I got the impression that that was more or less the idea for Friday. It was also mentioned this with short introductions. Maybe that can be combined. I mean, if it's a short introduction in the beginning from the people present, I don't think that would distract that process very much. Maybe it would actually be good. But this, to have one session with a deep dive into the work of one person who wants to focus on a specific thing of interest, that really feels like that would add a lot of value to what we've been doing, and that would be a next natural step as far as I can tell. So I really like that idea. Is that something we want to do, or what do you think?
I have just a small observation, that is, we have 4 calls each week, each that typically takes over 2 hours. And then if we actually review, we're probably already investing, some of us, at least 10 to 15 hours each week. So to give homework on top of yet another call is yet another filter. I'm not against it. I'm just saying this might filter some people away if they feel they cannot get to the homework before the actual call itself.
I've got a thing that I want to contribute, but my person is here. I've got to step away for a few minutes. I think that we can do both. It might be nice if the first hour was introductions, and I really see the value of each of us introducing ourselves on a regular basis as a practice and creating these little segments that we can then share as introductions and an asynchronous way of doing stuff. And then perhaps after that, there's a focus session on, and we just start cycling through the people. When Sam and I talked last week, we were talking about he and I both presenting in our work in a session, and then having the group feedback on where our work intersects. So that's another potential model. And we can just test them all. So I'll just be back in a few minutes.
So let me feed back on Tammy's idea, which was there's many forums already for one person's work to be featured and to be dug into in depth. There aren't very many where you can take 2 and look at the mashup and have people witness that and then sort of explore around that. And it's also bringing more bi-directional feedback to this whole process, And you can imagine that, hey, Doug, you and I, if we ever imagine that we actually have that session we could talk about for months, can actually have that mutual mashup where CMM meets COI meets PFTF meets collaborology, blah, blah, blah. That's going to be a rich engagement that I'm really looking forward to, okay? As opposed to, let me sit down and listen to Sam. Oh, geez, Or let me sit down and listen to pundit number XYZ, right? I think there's a more liveness if we can bring 2 together and then have that sort of, neutron meets neutron kind of fusion going on.
You mean then that on one session there's a focus, there's a theme which is announced beforehand, like it was for the upcoming Friday with you and Tammy, and then the focus is on 2 people, because that's not too much. I think that will really work, and then to sort of have an equal, more or less equal distribution of them sharing something, and then the room sort of looking at where it intersects, and see if those 2 contributions can be seen as a whole. Is that what you're?
Yeah, I would say those 2 can come together as part of a larger whole. That's the opportunity for the larger group. Because then Doug's in the back of his mind saying, here's where CMM could plug with both of those things. And so there's another idea for a possible Friday. And you could be thinking the same thing, Glenn. And Heiner's probably got 72 ideas he's thinking about already. He's just waiting to stack up the next 2 years of Fridays with.
Yeah. And of course, when it comes to adding homework, I mean, it would be natural that this would start with the people who actually want to invest time and energy in it. And I would certainly be interested in doing a deep dive in some of the things I've been looking at for many years, one of the Fridays, and get feedback on it. I think would be very valuable. And yeah.
And by the way, I think this might be an interesting way to bring new people into the group as well. For whomever is doing the recruiting, let's say, Glenn, you have a best friend, let's call him John, right? So maybe it's a chance for you and John, where you are someone that we pretty much kind of already know, okay? But you're bringing in John, and that little mashup then can be witnessed by some of us. And that's a good way for us to get familiar with, why you invited John, and specifically John's, past works and what he thinks. And that could be part of the onboarding process that would get them immediately participating.
Oh yeah, absolutely. About the scalability, by the way, isn't it then like the process that we're in? If we make the process really good, which is really what we're discussing here, that seems to be the foundation for scalability. Like you just mentioned, it's a very interesting concept. And if we can make it interesting and make it dynamic, make it into something very, very rewarding for the people involved, then I would suspect that it would probably be very interesting to watch as well. Similarly to last Sunday's session, which I felt was very rewarding for us as participants, and apparently some people really enjoyed watching it. And yeah, I really like that. I would really like to try that. Yeah, absolutely. 2 people working intersects. That's also very. That would be very interesting. And then, of course, that would be the headline on the list in the YouTube channel too. That so over time you could have several lists. But then again, that's the easy part. It's the process itself. If we have a conversation on a certain theme and we find the sort of right balance and right dynamic. Yeah.
So I know Tammy's got a guest, and we're past 2 hours now. I was wondering if you guys felt we needed to bring on more topics or follow-up, or whether we might want a closing round with how we thought this particular format or meeting went for you. Would that be useful? Rather than, hey, bye, see you next time.
Yeah, I'd like to do a wrap-up. I can't participate on any more of these Tuesdays, by the way, because on Tuesdays, doing something else. But yeah, wrap-up or whatever. I'm in no rush anyway. What do you think, Doug?
Yeah. I mean, a harvest for me is Well, first of all, I think we surfaced a whole bunch of memes and sort of nodes around building things, and people bringing not just what they bring in terms of expertise, skills, talents, knowledge, whatever, but also legacy and artifacts and all of that. And we surfaced a lot of the sort of challenge points and ingredients of that soup. That's on one dimension of this. On another dimension of this, it never ceases to amaze me how much more complicated it is and how much more time it takes to do this 3D. And when I say 3D, to do this adding the sort of human being and experiential piece dimension to the puzzle. It just really sort of like goes from here to here. It's like one of those balls, you know, those construction, those play balls that just expand and then contract mechanically. And every time you stir in the human being and the me versus we, right? And the yin and yang of that, it just goes boom. Gets just exponentially more moving parts and more stuff to sort of think about. And the Friday construct is different for me, and there's a takeaway in that, and I'm gonna think about that because I like the dimensionality and dynamics suggested, and it really isn't show and tell. It's something other. But the presumption, I guess, is that implicit in it is the show and tell. But it's not the whole thing. So I'm sort of eager and interested in seeing that and experiencing that. And what really comes to mind last but not least is we're about to head into an artifact generative rich process. And it's going to invoke and call and demand a lot of thinking about what do we do with them? How do we set them up? How do we make them accessible? What are the shares and privileges and controls, if any, or not? And all of the mechanics and pull-based, contextualized frame, you know, reality, which is the way to my preference, I would have those things arise and be figured out, like on a needs basis as they come up. But I think they're about to come up.
Yes, we're creating some problems to solve.
Absolutely. But I also have like unqualified faith and confidence in Sam being able to help us figure it out. And I'm complete.
So Tammy, while you were gone, we were observing that it was beyond 2 hours and we were kind of doing a little wrap-up round. And so Glenn and Doug have just completed theirs.
Do you want to go, Sam, and I'll do the final?
Sure. Doug, I think the observation that we're going into an artifact-rich phase, I think, is something that I've been anticipating and trying to think about how we do that. Almost, what is it, 4 or 5 months ago when we actually, Tammy recruited me to this, I think at that time I did reserve a number of domains, and we've not figured out how to use it. We only use globalchallengescollaboration.info right now to post a single PDF, which is our 30-page proposal. But we have some .net, .org, .com, I think, domains, so we can actually reuse them. And I've actually, in this last week, been thinking, you know, is it easier for us and for prospective new members to find things in a single place than to say, hey, go to Slack for this, go to Google Docs for that, go to Calendar for this. We might still do that. But I'm still kind of asking the question. I haven't come to an answer yet. if we actually are clear with what we're using, it may not be so bad. Google Calendar's not really that bad, and most people are already on it. Slack's not bad for, conversation threads, and et cetera, et cetera. I think I set myself up for disappointments sometimes. I'm just going to be upfront with all you guys. When I come to these meetings with lots of notes, okay, because these notes indicate, hey, this is where I think I might want to steer the conversation. And inevitably, we go down a track, which is very, very interesting. But then I'm left with this set of notes that says, well, maybe next time. And you guys observed that, from the very start. I appreciate your understanding of that. So maybe next time I won't come with any notes. We'll see what happens. But I do think that the questions underneath this Tuesday call, which is how do we each bring our stuff, and how do we think about how it mashes together, and how do we even have those conversations, and what do we need to do between and among ourselves to either as decisions or conventions or tools or whatever, so that we can have those conversations. I feel that we're maybe slightly less than halfway through that conversation. I'm feeling that we've surfaced, as you indicate, a number of potential issues. It probably isn't going to take too much for us to do some convergence, not on a final answer, but on a next answer. That's one of the things that I think I learned early is, it's very scary and very limiting to go after best practices, but it's useful to go after next practices. So I think that's something we can do. And so if we take that mindset, we can be more agile. And then we can be less caught up in actually making decisions which look like they're going to get carved in granite. I don't want to have us have that connotation or implication about decisions. I want our decisions that are basically penciled in and, available for improvement and iteration later. And it's that sense that I think we want to have our tooling as well. No tool is going to be set for life for this group, right? It's only what works next or what we might want to try. And if that's the way we take things, I think we can then be much more agile. So I am very, very curious to see how these conversations mesh. We have now 5 of these conversations going on, and they need to have, I think, some clear foci. Otherwise, people will basically vote with their feet and go, either towards or away one or more of these things. And so for me, I'm thinking this Tuesday and whether or not we want to keep it up is a question. I think there's going to be room for at least one more of these. And that is, can we come to a convergence about how we have these conversations about bringing people's works in and having the barn raising conversation of how does this tool help with that wall? How does that wall help from, your perspective, design sensitivities, and try and have that set of conversations. So as long as you're willing, I'm going to have at least one more of these and see whether there's still any momentum or whether we sort of come to a next practice for that. Over.
I see a beautiful coming together of practice and need and offering and testing. And I think that we can. Sorry, it's really storming right here. Like the rain is kind of lashing right outside my window. It's all very exciting. It's like, and this is just started happening outside my window. And that's a little bit about how I feel about the amount of information that we're swimming through, right? I know that I'm completely like it's at capacity, according to my ability to stay present, how much I can take in of the gorgeousness and beauty and intelligence and knowledge and wisdom and inspiration that we swim through in not just this group, but the groups that are connected and not connected yet. And so I feel like we've been dancing around this sort of deeper dive into our work and how it all intersects. And I think that it's just a do it thing. It's just a go for it. And it's I think it's interesting to look at those barriers, but it's more useful to just plow through them and take the opportunity to share our work. And, you know, I note some of my barriers. Will it make sense? Will I be going off into my deeply spiritual language and turn a bunch of people off? Maybe, but then I'll learn next time, don't do that, which is what I'm learning when I'm watching these pieces. Is I'm learning what language that I'm using either pulls or pushes. And so anyhow, I think we just do it, we try it, we test it, and we give ourselves permission to learn, which is going to mean making mistakes, which is going to mean we do it better next time. And my own personal mantra is just be better, right? You know, recently I've made some mistakes that I feel terrible about in this group. And, you know, the takeaway is be better. Don't do that again, right? And I think that there's a beautiful kind of piece of we don't really know. And there's a lot of personal work that we need to do to be able to show up to be fully present, articulate, and able to be received. And that personal work, you can't really jump over it. And no one person can do that work for another. So here we are, being mirrors for each other and supporters of each other. And I feel that that is a model, coming back to Anna's caring, that we just keep showing up and love and support each other for what we're all bringing to the table, because it is beautiful and overwhelming, and we're trying to figure it out as a 18-legged race or whatever it is. And so I'm just really grateful for every person's contribution, and wrestle with my own challenges in how I present myself, how I leave my, you know, as I loved your question, Doug, on Sunday, what is it that you want to leave behind to be fully present? Because I think we all have those pieces and attributes and ways that we kneecap ourselves. And the more that we can get quicker to the loving way to call that out / invite people, each other, to leave those things behind, that is demonstrating a level of caring that I think we all need, because none of us are perfect and we all need a little bit of help. So this is awesome. I'm really grateful, Sam, that you've been that you've stewarded and held the barn raising, because I think it's taking us to the steps that we need to move together.
I just have a brief question, since you mentioned jumping into it and next practices. Do we have a plan for the Friday sessions? Is that going to happen? Yeah. I was just wondering, was it Tammy? Did you plan?
Sorry, I think I'm frozen. So if you can hear me, I'm afraid I'm about ready to drop off, but I can't get anything to work right now. So.
Well, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
That.
Yeah.
So let me say goodbye if you can hear me, and I'll wait till you guys say goodbye to each other before I shut this meeting down.
Okay.
Bye for now.
So yeah, Glenn, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just wondering, what is the plan for the Friday session? is that something that we want to try for a while? And how do you see that? Was that something you wanted to host?
So I thought we would start with introductions and have it framed as a welcome space. You know, maybe it's an hour of welcoming, so we can, you know, do a little intro and invite everyone there to participate. It would be wonderful if people who have been here for a while demonstrate the introduction of self. Over the last few years, I've worked somewhat with Marshall Gantz's work, the story of self, us, and now. And so there's a lot of organizers that use that to do public outreach about social justice issues, environmental justice issues, that sort of thing. And it's a way to be able to say, you know, this is who I am. And this is how I fit into the larger frame. And this is what's important about this right now. Right. So it's a way of crafting that. So perhaps we can use that frame. It can be a looser introduction. But these are essentially what I'd like to do is have it recorded in 2 views, and to have one person that's actually starting and stopping for each person's intro, so that they're already pre-edited and then just need to be uploaded, so that each person has these growing examples, because I'm suggesting that everyone participating introduce themselves each time for that hour with whomever's there. And then to move into a conversation of where our work intersects is what I was originally suggesting, so that we can see the interrelationships between the people that are present there right now, and can build that facility of how things do actually connect. I see the deep dives as being different, and perhaps the welcome session transitions to a conversation of where our work intersects or diverges, so that we can get a sense of that tapestry and that weaving. I think that is plenty to sink our teeth into, and I think that the deeper dives into people's work, that could happen after, if people are up for a 4-hour session. But that might be beyond where we're able to go. So in this moment, I'm unsure if we should just look at the intersectionality of the convened group, whoever comes with the law of 2 feet, or whether we should do an intro and then have a set discourse according to either 1 or 2 people's work. I'm not sure. So I look in the next few days for people to perhaps weigh in about what would be most useful. I think that the deep dives are their own thing, and that's a bridge between the TED Talks, one-way communication style, and a multi-poly conversation that helps to bridge that one-way information pushing out into a way to actively receive feedback, ask questions, go deeper into specific bodies of work that people are presenting. And I purposefully kind of put Sam and I on deck to do our thing together, so that we could test some of those deeper principles in collaborology of how we share power and attention, to give ourselves an added test. And maybe that's too much. Maybe it is too much to have 2 people presenting their work and really get something out of that in even a couple-hour session. I'm not sure. That's an experiment. So I know that's not like a certainty piece, but those are the things that I'm thinking of. And the output from that would be, I would suggest that it be recorded in 2 forms. One as the little segments and pieces, of each person's introduction, as well as speaker views, so we can see everyone. So that gives the ability for people to harvest their artifacts, and we've underutilized the ability we have to start and stop these things. And I think that having a person creating shorter segments as it's happening in real time can help us to create shorter artifacts that are more receivable by
Yeah.
people, and have multiple ways that they can be used in the community.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really just landing on who are we, what do we bring to the table, how can we create different types of artifacts that can be used to help to surface that work and give people points of entry into the conversation, right?
Yeah.
And so further to that, I was thinking these little intro segments could be strung together, and this is something that could be scaffolded as a thing that we use, so that in this conversation, say we each had a profile video that our most recent one we really liked because we hit it, it really worked to explain particularly what we're trying to push forward right now, and that those five, if there's 5 participants, those 5 participants' little short video could be put together at the beginning, which is them introducing themselves, and then appended, connected, or linked to the video conversation, whatever it might be, so that another person coming in can say, "Oh, that's Doug. Oh, neat. He's into this, this, and this," and they can have their own ideas about the interrelation between people, and have a bit more information about the who of what they're about to see as a discourse, and that these things can be used to help to scaffold where we're going in terms of barn raising.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because over time you can even have a list for each person, so you can have many intros. I really like that, but you're still not sure if you want to combine that with deep diving, or maybe that's something to think about then. Or...
My intuition is that we should use that next period of time after everyone's introduced themselves to look at our points of complementarity and intersect in the group. I think it's makes the most sense as a process for people to understand what the GCC could be if we live in it that way. And I think the deep dives may be another day. And maybe it's not a set day. Maybe it's just a practice that we're encouraging people to do on their own time, and present as pieces to the group. Maybe it's not just an open door thing. Maybe it's because one of the things I'd like to do is I'd like to see Doug, Sam, Gertrude, and Glenn have a discourse about where their 4 pieces intersect. And I love what a 4-up is, because there's enough space for each person to feel heard. And it just, I like that vibe, and I want to test that space. And I think that limiting participation and being specific about the players gives us an opportunity to set the stage for potentiality and let the people fill it with whatever they choose to bring. And this can kind of test that. Now, those could be really interesting deep dives, where there's 3 people supporting one person and sharing their thing. They're each bringing themselves too. And because we are beginning to know each other so well, there are going to be some capacities and availabilities of knowledge that are just, of course, this is the piece to bring into that chunk, so that we can do some leapfrogging as well, not just the receiving of one person's work, but how does it fit together? Yeah.
That's really, I love that. So that's more like something we have to agree among ourselves and put up specific sessions.
Yes, and perhaps propose. Maybe what it is, you know, for someone coming into this group, maybe one of the little games that they can play is to say, "Oh my God, I'm really interested in Rama's work, in Neil's work, in Doug's work, and in Gertrude's work, and I want to see what that constellation is." So perhaps, you know, all those 4 people have to agree to have the conversation, but it gives anyone in the space the capacity to suggest it. And of course, organizing that depends on each person to make it happen. But at any point, any player in the game can help to frame what it is that we might do together. And it's that porousness that I think gives us a platform for true decentralized sovereign decision making in this opt-in way that is the law of 2 feet.
Yeah, that's great.
So we've got some great spaces to create and fill and test, and I just feel really good about how we've all come with our warts and all, so that we can be human in it and make mistakes and have that allowance to have the potential to grow.
Yeah.
It's all a gift and it's all learning.
Sure is.
And so I'm just going to lean into the Friday sessions just in terms of what's really bubbling, because I'm listening to the field, you know, Rama's suggestions and Sam's, you know, passionate calling for us to figure these beginning pieces out, you know, and all of our contributions in that space. I'm doing my best to kind of hold those all and come up with what I feel I've heard most resonantly. So an intro session, where does this converge period, and then to close, takeaways and next steps, right? And maybe some of those next steps are specific conversations to do deep dives. And I think that's a natural curve. So if we're doing that weekly, any new person can come in and introduce themselves. They've got an artifact, they're getting something from it. The what's in it for me is not only do you get to have the experience, you get to have an artifact that then you can use, reflect on, choose to share, or not, as the case may be. As well as this air space where we can see what their intersectionality is, as well as a very important component of what are our next steps and what actions can we take to make this ever more real, developed, designed, and responding to the needs that are heard in the session. So it feels like an agile process that would be very generative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have some great plans, that's for sure. So, are we good for now, or any final words? I think it's been a great session.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So,
And I guess Thursday.
Okay. Until then.
yeah, bye-bye.